Welcome back to Albany County Direct. I'm your host, Albany County Executive Dan McCoy. Today we're talking about an issue that affects every community, violence prevention. It's a topic that's often discussed after a tragedy, unfortunately, but some of the most important work happens long before violence even occurs. Joining me today is Albany County Director of Justice Coordination and Strategic Initiatives, Stefanie Thomas. It's a long title, but there's a lot that goes behind that title. Stefanie, thank you for being here today. And before we do a deep dive into today's conversation, tell our listeners a little about your role in the work you oversee for Albany County and the importance of that role, what you've been doing. You're kind of like that quiet person that has so much on their plate when it deals with this issue.
So thank you for having me. In my role, I provide leadership across a portfolio of 7 county departments whose work intersects criminal and juvenile justice, public safety, youth and family services, as well as victim support. And a big part of my responsibility is looking across those systems and seeing how the pieces fit together, where are the gaps, where are departments working towards similar goals but may not be connected, and then also where do we need to develop new initiatives or strengthen what we already have. So really my role is to keep that broader strategy in view and help move those priorities forward through your office.
That's a lot, right? And it can go into many different directions. So violence prevention can mean different things to different people, and people look at it differently. They all have a different outlook of what prevention is. What does violence prevention really look like? And many people have heard about the City of Albany's new Office of Violence Prevention, and I commend the mayor for doing this, but a lot of it we do too. So it's like getting in sync, and we're all trying to row in the same direction because at the end of the day, we all have the common goal to stop violence. And, you know, the problem is I went to a neighborhood meeting, and I'm out in this community, and people are like, well, how are we going to stop gang prevention? I go, it's been going on since the history of time. And I go, if I could solve it, and I wish I could, I'd be president of the United States, right? It's just one of them issues that you have to stay on top of. We have to adjust. We have to continue to look at to make things work. And not every model fits one outcome. And we always say, hey, what's working, what's not? So these are different things that we have to look at. But this has sparked a lot of conversations. So can you explain what Albany County's equivalent is and how this works in organizations at our county level? So how does this work across? You just named your overseeing 7 agencies. You got all the stuff going on. How's it equal out? So,
sure. Like you said, we took a different approach. Every model is different. And I also think what the city is doing is great. But rather than the county creating a standalone office, we recognize that we already have departments who address most of the components of violence prevention and have been doing so for years. However, what was really missing was the coordination of their efforts, which is kind of where my role comes into play. I help to ensure that our priorities are aligned and the right partners are together.
Which is awesome. So why is it important for this work to be housed in the executive level? Because I get that question all the time. They're like, well, why is it there? Because it's an important topic. It's something we always got to stay on top of. But what's the advantages of that provides to you in this program?
Well, because violence doesn't fit neatly into just one department or agency. So a young person, for example, may be struggling in school, experiencing trauma at home, have behavioral health needs, may be involved in the justice system, all going on at the same time, and no single agency or department can address all of those needs. So having that work connected at the executive level allows us to look across departments and systems, establish shared priorities, and bring the appropriate partners together, and then maintain focus on the broader strategy rather than treating each issue in isolation.
Which is an awesome response. And a lot of people think about violence only after someone enters the criminal justice center. And I want to back up some of the listeners, first time listening to this, or people that don't follow a lot what the county does. When we started the equity agenda, and I got it from King County, Seattle, one model doesn't fit, but they had a great model there. So we turned it around and we made it fit here. And it's the same thing. Like we realized we want to get youth into programs. That's why we started the UCAM, and we did that. And when I started this program years ago, that basically we take a first offender and we, put them through 6 weeks of training, and we, try to help them out. And then they got paid at the end, which I took a lot of criticism. It was $500, but they had to pay the restitution back, not the parents, not the grandparents, not the guardian, to understand the value of $1. And they used to look at me, well, that's my money. Why do I get to pay? Well, why does the person, your guardian or grandparent or your parent, have to pay, right, for your bad actions? And trying to get them to go through that. We invest heavily in prevention, which a lot of people don't realize. And it was kind of like the COVID years. People looked at it, and we look at a situation, and we see the inequity with health, not to go into a different topic, food insecurity. And we move on, and sometimes we just become reactive, not proactive. And we've been trying to be very proactive with this, adjusting, working with multiple agencies within the county and outside the county. What do you say to all that?
So how do we measure success?
Right, and how do we stop the violence?
So, well, there's a lot of answers to that, actually. So how do we measure success? We look at a number of outcomes, depending on the program. Participation, completion rates, referrals, service connections, demographics, and whether we are actually reaching the people the programs are designed to serve in the first place. But the numbers are only part of the picture. We also need to listen to the people that are impacted by the decisions that we make. And a good example of that is our Juvenile Justice Youth Advisory Committee. We are now in our second year of that initiative, which is facilitated by Fourth Family and made up entirely of youth throughout the city of Albany. And these young people are dedicated, they're smart, and they bring a perspective that we simply just don't have sitting in government offices. So we take their feedback into the work that we are developing, because youth voice is often missing from conversations about youth violence and youth programming. And then I think how we measure success is also an area where we could become stronger. I would like to develop a dashboard that has centralized justice performance indicators throughout, so we can check how we're doing and then make decisions in real time.
Absolutely agree. And it's like when you look at the data analytics, and it's always $1 million question. People go, well, here's the data, crime's going down, it's going down. People got to feel safe in the community. We have to have an outcome, and these are all good measures that you want to do, and people want to see change. And we pivot. We have to pivot with investments that are making a difference or that are not making a difference. These are things that we constantly have to do, and people don't understand, like something that's working today or yesterday, we have to change and move forward. And one of the things, and I know you answered most of that questions, right? But I just, the thing that bothers me the most, and listen, people get emotional, something happens, and everyone comes out and they have solutions. And I see other politicians like myself go out and they say, oh, we're going to do this and this has to change. We just went through this with funding before what happened last 4th of July, and everyone's pointing fingers. Well, that doesn't help the community. It doesn't help the violence. It doesn't. Calmer heads will prevail if we work together as a group and saying, okay, let's look at it. But it shouldn't be after a tragedy. This is something you do every day in my office, and you do it so well, always on top of things. We're always talking about this, and it's hard. We have to get that message out to the community. I know the taxpayers should know how we're spending money. People should know what we're doing, but it doesn't help when other people jump in as a Monday morning quarterback, like I like to say now, or the politician, the armchair politician that just goes, oh, no, we got to do it, and then they walk away. Right. After the news story is written, after they get their 2 seconds on the media, but we're dealing with it every day, and pointing fingers or saying something's not working, or we got to look at how we spend money, and everyone wants to do it. And I'll say this, from a year ago, that all dropped. It was a hot topic for 30 days, and then when everyone stopped writing about it, the paper stopped writing about it, then they moved on. I haven't heard from them again, right, until something happens. But we do this every day. So from your standpoint, and I said a lot, right, and you answered a lot, what do you say to all that?
So I think that one of the most important takeaways from this conversation is probably what you were kind of hinting towards when you were talking about something happens and then people react to it. And I think often you have like this battle between prevention and then accountability. And I think prevention and accountability are not opposing ideas. I think that we should be investing heavily in prevention, and we should be addressing trauma and behavioral health needs, mental health, family instability, housing, lack of opportunity in general, and then the other factors that contribute to justice involvement. But when harm does occur, we do need accountability, and that doesn't have to mean that we're giving up on a youth, but it does mean recognizing that harm and responding appropriately, protecting the community, and giving that person a meaningful opportunity to change their behavior. Because if we ignore accountability, we are not just being fair to the victims, we're not being fair to the communities, and we are ultimately not being fair to the people we are trying to help in the first place. So I would say we are constantly working to strengthen prevention, but we are also working to improve accountability and engage families and connect young people to the supports and the services that can reduce justice involvement.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
And I'll say this. I don't like yes people around me that just say, hey, I got every great idea, and they go with it. And that's one thing I know you will stand up and say something's not working. And, it's a complex work with no single outcome for the solution, right? And from your point of view, what is the biggest challenge is to prevent violence in our community, right? And it's like $1 million question, right? You're going to go hit the lotto. Mm-hmm. What would you say to that?
The biggest challenge would be fragmentation. Easy. Okay. We have a lot of departments, organizations, providers, community partners doing the meaningful work, right? And we do have good individual programs, but programs alone do not automatically add up to an effective violence prevention strategy. And it's not just having the challenge of having, too many cooks in the kitchen, which also is a problem, but we're also navigating a landscape where organizations may be working towards similar goals, but then operating under different funding streams. So at the end of the day, without strong coordination, we're often going to see duplication in some areas, gaps in others, and then missed opportunities to share the information. So a big part of this work is creating the structures for communication and building trust across partners and making sure everybody understands not only what their role is, but how it fits into a larger shared vision. Because ultimately, the challenge is not simply having programs, it's making sure the programs, and the investments are connected to a coherent strategy.
Love that answer, and I love what you just said about too many chefs in the kitchen, right? And that happens.
That's always a problem.
People get emotional, they get on board, and they, it's like when I used to run a neighborhood association, they would come and they had they wanted a stop sign or they wanted something done, and the minute they got what they wanted, they disappeared, which is fine, right? But the problem is this is work, and it's a lot of effort and time to constantly sit there like, no, we're doing this. This is what we need help with, or someone makes a knee-jerk reaction to the media and says, oh, no, we got to look at this and how we're spending money and getting it to the right partners. And we had to put a whole list together of all the partners we have out in the community, the different organizations we're working with. And everyone has the same common goal, to stop violence. And the hardest thing is getting everyone to say, okay, you're spending this money here, we're spending this money there. How can we coordinate to get a bigger bang for our buck, right? And make change. And, I like what you said. And I'm not saying, so I want to clarify this before I get in trouble. We're not saying we don't want community input. We do. But
no,
it has to be every day. It has to be all year long. It can't just be when there is some violence happens in the community and we step up and we say the same thing. It's like Bill Murray and Groundhog Day. Every time I see it and we go back to everything that we've talked about in the past and we're kind of like, oh, we got to do this, we got to do that. Yeah. And then take the reels back from all the news, from all the tragedy that has happened, and it's the same people saying the same thing. I get it. It's a frustrating topic to try to address, and we are. And I wish I had that, I could go hit a light switch in a room and saying, it's done, we fixed it. But it takes dialogue every day, and that's what you focus on, and I want to commend you for all the work that you're doing. And, if the listeners take anything away from one message today, this conversation, what do you hope it is?
That community safety is not simply the absence of violence. It requires investment in young people and families and victims and neighborhoods, opportunities in general, stability and services. And prevention alone is not enough, just like enforcement alone is not enough. So we're going to have to invest across the full continuum.
No, I agree. And one of the things is like always, and I always compliment my probation department, right? Always thinking outside the box. We did a GED program, Dress to Success.
Yep. Project Growth.
Yep. We literally fought. I don't want to say fought. Took a long time. Did DMV to let us get pre-licensing a license, so they got identification. And I remember the topic was giving illegal aliens ID card, and I'm like, people don't realize how many people we have on probation or other ways in the community that have no way of identifying themselves, right? And that's the same thing here. So we got county ID cards. We said non-employee to help them establish it, doing resumes, and every investment we made, that means that person's not reoffending. And every dollar we invest in programs like this, you can't put a dollar amount on someone that's incarcerated the rest of their life, right? How much money that costs you to do that. So it is like to use the prevention dollars, and we have to do a better job, and I know that, of educating the community. Like, yeah, we're investing this amount of money and we should invest more, but we're saving this. And it's hard to show that we're saving this, but we don't know, like, if that person went to jail for life or 30 years or 10 years, what that costs. And then when they come out, they have no skill set, in which we've tried to change that and trying to get them back on. Everyone goes, well, we got to give them a second chance. And the problem with the second chance is no one wants to give them that second chance,
right?
Which is so hard. And, we've covered a lot, and we could continue on for another 3 hours.
We actually could have like mini segments of different topics of violence prevention. That's how many components there are.
No, we really could. And, it's like one of the things we got to bring everyone together in a room, and like we did for aging, or, when we talk about, the opportunities in Albany County for, people bidding on contracts and stuff like that. We really need to, try to do more. And we'll admit, we're not perfect, right? We're trying to be, but we need people to be constructive at the time before and after a violent incident, and cooler heads will prevail, right? Not just running into a room saying what we should do and shouldn't do. This takes time and energy, and I don't want to say I watch every day going at it, passionately about going at it and trying to change it. And it's like one of the things when I talked to a new mayor, it was like, this is great. I know what the area she's going in. Like, we're doing this. Let's get together,
right? So
we're not duplicating it, and,
exactly.
And we got more resources going on, and better coordination going forward. Because even then, I'd love to tell every listener, it's not going to happen again. We're going to prevent it. Unfortunately, tragedy happens, and people make them mistakes as they move forward. So before we wrap it up, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners or to point out?
Yes, I think that, like you said, this requires all parties. And I also commend the city for their new office. I want to collaborate, and I think that that's what this is going to take. We need everybody at the table. So we are here to listen and happy to have this conversation.
We need partners, not chefs in the kitchen, right?
We do.
We need
Everyone
partners.
needs to know their role.
Correct. And it's right. And it's just like the same thing, like I like to say to our state lawmakers, like, look, it's great, but coordinate with the people, coordinate with the groups. It takes time and energy. That's why we got staff listening to the people, and coming up with a solution to the best of our ability, or what, like I always said, like, the budget process. Bring the counties in, talk to us. Let us know how it's going to affect the program or what's working. Same thing we got to do with our budget process. People don't realize we start our budget process way before May. They all have to have it in July, and it takes a long time. Our budget's almost $1 billion, right? To coordinate what's working, what's not working, how we can better affect something. And the same thing with the violence and everything else that's going on. The flare guns, we took care of it, and then we just unfortunately just had, I don't want to quote this, I think it was like a 13-year-old just shot some other kid in the face with a flare gun, took half his face off, unfortunately. It bothered me, but a law is not going to change that, right? We have to change the whole thing of why that happened. Parents' accountability, talking to people, talking to, councils in school, the community, and
it's across the full continuum.
Yeah.
We have to invest in all components. So
no, I totally agree with you. And again, we could just keep going on different topics, but we're going to have to do this again to really deep dive. But I will say to the listeners out there, if you like what we're saying, don't like what we're saying, please, we need your constructive criticism. And again, I love people on Facebook and stuff that just want to criticize everything.
Right.
The keyboard heroes across this country that just want to say no to everything or denounce everything. Again, we're not perfect. Not every program's going to work. But I don't mind. I don't like failing, but I don't mind stepping up, dusting myself off, readjusting.
Pivoting.
Right, and saying, okay, what we tried didn't work. We'll try again. But what we're doing is not working.
Right.
So until we get it right, we're not afraid to say, yeah, we invested in this program. Unfortunately, it didn't have the outcome we thought. Now we got to readjust. And looking around the country, what works, doesn't work. How's crime going down in different areas? Is it, that's why we heavily invested in money for people to go to school, to get a trade, to get the certification. But now we got to get them to the table. That's the other thing. It's like that. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Okay, we have the resources there, but now you got to be willing internally to want to do it. And it's hard. You can take minimum wage and raise it up to $30 an hour, but if someone can go and sell drugs or do something else and make a year's salary in a day, they're not going to go. They're like, well, hey, I can do this, and it's a lot easier than this. But to have a better life and a better outcome, but it takes a lot. And I do want to.
It does.
Steph, I really want to thank you for being here, for joining us, and for everything you do to make Albany County, a safer place to live, which is so important. And thank you for all the listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Be sure to check out Albany County Direct on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now on the YouTube podcast. So don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. And again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Albany County Direct.